Elijah Johnson, a 35-year-old homeowner, had recently purchased a charming property featuring a spacious backyard and a private swimming pool. For Elijah, this new abode symbolized a fresh start. He'd worked hard to attain the stability and comfort he always dreamed of. On most days, he could be found lounging by the pool with a cool drink, soaking in the serenity of his personal retreat. It was a sunny afternoon, and Elijah had decided to take advantage of the pleasant weather. He set up a soft lounge chair on the concrete deck, positioned beneath a large umbrella that offered just the right amount of shade. The gentle sound of rippling water helped him unwind from the usual workweek stress. The neighborhood, Pinecrest Heights, seemed like a peaceful place filled with neatly manicured lawns, quiet streets, and friendly neighbors who waved in passing. Yet that sense of calm abruptly vanished when Elijah noticed someone standing at the far edge of his yard. A woman, later identified as Rhonda Maxwell, hovered near the gate that separated his property from the sidewalk. At first, Elijah presumed she might be a neighbor simply out for a walk or looking for her missing pet. But there was something about her stance, arms crossed, chin raised, that hinted at a different motive. Curious and slightly concerned, Elijah stood up and walked over to greet her. As he approached, Rhonda didn't smile or offer any introduction. Instead, she eyed the pool behind him with an air of entitlement. Her gaze flickered between Elijah and the shimmering blue water as though she were assessing something that rightfully belonged to her. Confused, he attempted a friendly hello, but she returned only a curt nod before cutting straight to the point. In a tone more commanding than polite, Rhonda inquired if Elijah lived alone and whether the pool was exclusively for his use. Her attitude caught him off guard. She spoke as if it were inconceivable for one person to enjoy such a luxury by himself. Feeling a wave of unease, Elijah responded that, yes, this was his property and he typically enjoyed the pool on his own. Rhonda offered no pleasantries, no explanation for her presence. She simply stood there, scrutinizing Elijah. The silence stretched uncomfortably until she made an unexpected comment about how unfair it was that he had the pool all to himself. Puzzled, Elijah tried to maintain his composure, though her words struck him as intrusive. He didn't recall ever meeting her before, nor did he receive any welcoming gestures from neighbors of her sort. That was the moment Elijah realized his tranquil afternoon was about to take a drastic turn. Whatever Rhonda's reasons for showing up unannounced, it quickly became clear she had no intention of leaving quietly. Little did he know this would be the start of a confrontation that would test both his patience and his sense of security in his new home. Standing at his backyard fence, Elijah Johnson tried to remain calm as Rhonda Maxwell fixed him with a piercing stare. She had yet to offer a proper greeting, let alone identify herself as a neighbor. Instead, she pressed on with a surprising request, or rather, a command. Pointing toward the inviting pool that glistened in the sun, Rhonda declared that her son, Milo, wanted to swim. Elijah blinked, taken aback. Although he had no objection to children enjoying a pool on a hot day, the directness of Rhonda's demand threw him off balance. She spoke as if it were a foregone conclusion that Elijah would comply. Milo's been bored all summer, she explained, her tone bordering on condescending, and it's unfair for you to keep such a fantastic pool all to yourself. A swirl of questions flooded Elijah's mind. Who was Milo? Where did these two live? Had they recently moved to the neighborhood as well? And why would they assume a private swimming pool was up for public use? He drew a breath to steady himself, then calmly responded that he wasn't comfortable letting strangers into his personal space. After all, he had never met Rhonda or Milo before, and liability concerns alone made the request quite complicated. Rhonda's reaction to his hesitation was immediate. She frowned deeply, as if personally offended by his refusal. "You're seriously going to turn away a child?" she demanded. "Don't you have any sense of community spirit? Milo just wants to have fun. You look like you could share, but apparently, you prefer to hoard your luxury." Stunned, Elijah attempted to keep the conversation civil. He explained that he paid for the house and the pool, which he maintained at considerable expense. Since moving to Pinecrest Heights, he'd spent time ensuring everything was up to code and safe for his own use. Allowing people he didn't know to swim without supervision was a liability he couldn't risk, especially not after he'd only been in the community for a few weeks. While he empathized with a child wanting to cool off, he suggested there was a well-maintained public pool just a short drive away. To his dismay, Rhonda scoffed at the suggestion. "Public pools are always crowded and dirty," she snapped. "Why should we settle for that when you have a pristine oasis right here?" She folded her arms, glaring at Elijah as though he were the selfish one in the scenario. "What do you think? Where are you watching from? Let us know in the comments, like, share, and don't forget to subscribe for more shocking stories like this." A tense silence ensued, broken only by the occasional chirp of birds overhead. Elijah couldn't help noticing how Rhonda's posture grew increasingly rigid, her frustration palpable. Part of him understood that people sometimes felt entitled if they believed resources were being withheld, but her manner veered well beyond a friendly inquiry. "Maybe if you got to know me," Rhonda persisted, her eyes flicking from Elijah to the pool and back again, "you'd see this isn't such a big deal. We could come by for an hour or two, and no one would get hurt." Elijah shook his head gently. He wasn't about to invite strangers onto his property, especially given Rhonda's aggressive approach. The more she pressed, the more uneasy he felt. What began as an unexpected demand was rapidly evolving into a confrontation with undertones of anger and entitlement, one that left Elijah uncertain about how to end the standoff peacefully. After Rhonda Maxwell made her audacious demand to use Elijah Johnson's private pool, the mood in the backyard intensified. Though Elijah attempted to remain courteous, he sensed that Rhonda interpreted his politeness as a sign of weakness. Her insistence on Milo's right to swim grew sharper, transforming from a simple request into a form of aggressive entitlement. Elijah tried once more to offer reasonable alternatives. In addition to mentioning a nearby public pool, he suggested that community centers in Pinecrest Heights often hosted summer swim days for kids. Yet, every suggestion fell on deaf ears. Rhonda scoffed at the notion of Milo swimming with a bunch of strangers, ironically ignoring the fact that Elijah was, in fact, a stranger to her. She dismissed the local YMCA as overcrowded, and the idea of setting up a small inflatable pool at her own home as a cheap imitation. Standing by the fence, Elijah took a measured breath. "I'm sorry," he said softly. "I really am. But this is my home. I can't just let anyone in." Rhonda's eyes narrowed. "So you're going to be that kind of neighbor," she retorted, her voice dripping with sarcasm. "The one who guards his little castle and doesn't care about the kids in the area? Nice to know where we stand." It dawned on Elijah that Rhonda's hostility might be fueled by more than just a desire for her son to swim. Perhaps she resented him for owning a place she perceived as luxurious. Or maybe she believed the neighborhood's social norms entitled her to any amenity within sight. Whatever her motivations, Elijah recognized that the conversation was no longer just about a pool, it had escalated into a standoff over private property rights and personal boundaries. Things took a more ominous turn when Rhonda's voice rose in pitch, her frustration morphing into overt aggression. "You realize how selfish you look," she barked, jabbing a finger in Elijah's direction. "People around here won't take kindly to your kind of arrogance. How many others have you turned away just because you think you're too good to share?" Elijah, taken aback, tried to maintain composure. He had encountered disgruntled neighbors before, but rarely anyone so brazenly confrontational. It felt as though Rhonda was rallying some invisible audience, painting him as a villain who hoarded resources. An uneasy knot formed in his stomach, urging him to end this encounter quickly. Yet he also knew he couldn't simply concede to her demands, letting an aggressive stranger and her child onto his property presented both safety and liability concerns. Sensing that reason might not prevail, Elijah decided it best to part ways. He thanked Rhonda for stopping by but asserted that he had no intention of changing his stance. "I understand your position," he said, edging away from the fence, "but I'm not comfortable letting anyone use my pool without my supervision, especially when we've just met." Rhonda's response was nothing short of venomous. "Oh, so you think you're too important for a single mother and her kid, huh?" she snapped. "You'd rather watch Milo bake in the sun while you lounge around in luxury." Unbelievable. Before Elijah could respond, she pulled out her phone and began tapping furiously. At first, he assumed she might be texting someone or making a call. He had no idea the extent to which she would escalate the situation. The next moment, Rhonda lifted the phone to her ear, voice trembling with artificial distress. "Yes, hello. I need the police to come," she declared, affecting a panicked tone. "There's a man here, he's threatening me, and I'm worried for my safety." Elijah's heart lurched. In a split second, the confrontation had veered into a potential crisis. He stood on his own property, accused of threatening behavior he had in no way exhibited. Worse still, Rhonda peppered her conversation with references to Elijah being a black homeowner, framing it as though his presence was menacing by default. The realization that she was calling the authorities under false pretenses sent a chill down his spine. He opened his mouth to protest but quickly decided it was useless. She was clearly spinning a narrative he couldn't control. Instead, Elijah reached for his own phone, turning on the camera to record the latter part of the exchange. His heart pounded as he captured Rhonda's performance, the furrowed brow, the feigned fear, the voice nearly breaking as she recounted a fictional scenario of harassment. Meanwhile, Milo, Rhonda's son, hovered behind her, looking on quietly. The boy seemed more confused than frightened, suggesting he wasn't buying his mother's claims any more than Elijah did. Yet Rhonda remained unwavering, continuing her dramatic phone call. In that tense moment, Elijah understood he needed to protect himself. Society had seen too many incidents where assumptions and biases led to unjust outcomes. Armed with video evidence, at least he stood a chance of defending himself if the police arrived swayed by Rhonda's distorted account. His hands shook as he recorded, a mix of anger, fear, and determination surging through him. He silently questioned how a request to swim in someone's private pool had escalated so quickly. But he also recognized the uncomfortable truth behind Rhonda's actions. Her readiness to invoke the police, coupled with racial overtones, indicated she believed she could leverage stereotypes to force compliance or exact punishment. As her call ended, Rhonda waved her phone in Elijah's direction. "We'll see who's laughing when the police show up," she declared, venom in her voice. Elijah steadied his phone, capturing every word. The stage was set for a confrontation he never wanted, yet one he was now compelled to face head-on. No sooner had Rhonda Maxwell ended her phone call than she fixed Elijah Johnson with a triumphant glare. It was as if she believed summoning the police would instantly force him to bend to her demands. Adrenaline coursed through Elijah's veins. He maintained his composure, still recording the situation on his phone, knowing how crucial evidence could be in these heated moments. For a moment, the backyard was silent except for the soft lapping of water against the pool's edge. Milo stood off to one side, looking uneasy. Meanwhile, Rhonda patted her hair down, as if preparing for a dramatic performance. Elijah felt a knot in his stomach. He knew how a one-sided narrative could shift perceptions before facts were even examined. Minutes later, the wail of sirens cut through the summer air. A patrol car pulled up in front of Elijah's house, and out stepped Officer Fowler, looking alert but not necessarily alarmed. Elijah tried to calm his racing thoughts. He'd never met Officer Fowler before, and had no idea whether the officer would approach this dispute impartially. Rhonda wasted no time. She rushed to the fence, her voice trembling in mock distress. "Officer, thank goodness you're here. I'm so frightened. This man," she motioned to Elijah with an accusatory finger, "has been threatening me and my son. He won't let us swim in his pool, and when I asked nicely, he became aggressive." Elijah watched Officer Fowler's expression, hoping to see some skepticism. However, the officer glanced at Rhonda sympathetically and turned to Elijah with a hint of caution. "Sir," he began, "could you explain what's happening here?" Despite his irritation at Rhonda's false depiction, Elijah forced himself to speak calmly. "Officer, my name is Elijah Johnson. This is my private property and my pool. Ms. Maxwell showed up uninvited, demanding that I let her son swim. I refused, and she called 911 claiming I was harassing her. I have the entire incident recorded. Rhonda scoffed. He's lying, officer. Look at me, do I seem like the type to overreact? I'm just concerned for my son, and this man's been menacing us. She gestured at her phone, as if the act of calling 911 alone validated her story. Officer Fowler asked for identification, which Elijah calmly provided. Then, the officer glanced between them, still grappling with conflicting accounts. Ma'am, you stated the man was threatening you. Could you elaborate on how exactly? Rhonda hesitated, her earlier confidence wavering. He said we had to get off his property or else, she claimed, words stumbling as though improvised. We were just standing here, being neighborly, and he started yelling. Elijah's frustration mounted. Officer, I have a video. I never raised my voice, nor did I threaten her in any way. She's upset I wouldn't grant her access to my pool. That's the only reason we're in this situation. With that, Elijah offered to play back a snippet of his recording. Officer Fowler seemed somewhat open to the idea, but Rhonda interjected, voice shrill. Why are we even entertaining this nonsense? He's probably edited the footage. People like him know how to manipulate technology. Those words stung, laced with implications about Elijah's background. He took a steadying breath, refusing to rise to the bait. Officer, he said, if you'll allow me, I'll show you that the recording was continuous and unaltered. Before Fowler could respond, Rhonda spoke again, doubling down on her complaint. He's using intimidation tactics, standing so close to me, overshadowing me. I felt unsafe. She cast a glance at Milo, who looked more bored than frightened. Elijah realized that logic alone might not suffice here. Rhonda was preying on fear and stereotypes, hoping to paint him as a menacing figure. He took a step back, not wanting to crowd anyone, and lifted his phone in plain view. I'd appreciate a fair look at the evidence, he asserted, meeting Officer Fowler's gaze directly. The officer nodded, albeit slowly. Let's step away from the fence, Fowler suggested, guiding Elijah a few steps back for an air of neutrality. Rhonda followed, raising her voice to maintain control of the narrative. Elijah started the video from the point where Rhonda first escalated the conversation, ensuring the clip included her phone call to 911 and her false claim of being threatened. As the video played, Fowler's expression shifted. The footage showed Rhonda entering the scene, demanding pool access, and growing enraged when Elijah refused. Nowhere did it depict him threatening or harassing her. Instead, it captured her simmering anger and the moment she decided to call the police. Fowler said nothing for a long moment after the video ended. Rhonda, flustered, tried to regain momentum. He's cunning, she insisted. I'm sure he cut out the parts where he threatened me. Fowler exhaled, apparently trying to remain impartial. Ma'am, it seems the video does conflict with some of your statements. He turned to Elijah. I see no sign of aggression from you so far. Then, returning to Rhonda, he added, is there any other evidence you'd like to present? Flustered, Rhonda sputtered. He must have turned the camera off earlier. We need to talk about the fact that he singled me out, a mother trying to give her child a nice day. This is discrimination. Elijah's anger mingled with a sense of disbelief. She was playing every card possible, fear, motherhood, and now discrimination, twisting the situation into a labyrinth of accusations. Officer Fowler looked torn, wavering between the sympathetic weight of Rhonda's pleas and the clear inconsistency revealed by the recording. Let's stay calm, Fowler finally stated, stepping back. Mr. Johnson, I see you have a valid reason to maintain privacy. Ms. Maxwell, if you'd like to pursue a complaint, we can take a statement, but so far I'm not convinced an offense occurred. Then, somewhat hesitantly, Fowler added, maybe it's best if, for now, everyone keeps a bit of distance to avoid more conflict. Rhonda bristled at the suggestion, crossing her arms. Elijah, for his part, remained composed, though frustration simmered under his calm exterior. He had hoped the presence of law enforcement might quickly dispel Rhonda's false narrative. Instead, it felt like he was left in limbo, under scrutiny in his own yard, forced to defend his right to peaceful enjoyment of his property. As Fowler took Rhonda aside for further questioning, Elijah realized the conflict was far from resolved. Even with video evidence, biases and emotional manipulation hovered in the air. In that moment, he resolved to stand firm. His quiet afternoon had turned into a storm of accusations, but he wasn't about to surrender his own home or his dignity to someone else's twisted version of events. While Officer Fowler continued speaking with Rhonda Maxwell on one side of the yard, Elijah Johnson stepped back, phone still in hand, aware that every second could matter. The possibility of having his words twisted or misrepresented made him determined to document as much as possible. The camera on his phone had become his shield against distortions and false claims. The conversation between Fowler and Rhonda remained heated, even though Elijah couldn't hear every word. At times, Rhonda's raised voice carried across the yard, "He's trying to intimidate me," or, "I'm a single mother, how can he be so cruel?" Elijah sighed. So many accusations, so little truth. He cast a quick glance at Milo, who lingered awkwardly by his mother's side, occasionally fidgeting with a small toy. The boy's confusion was evident, and Elijah felt a twinge of pity for him. Whatever Rhonda's motives, Milo seemed merely caught in the middle. Trying to keep his composure, Elijah began narrating details quietly into his phone's microphone, the date, time, and the sequence of events leading up to Officer Fowler's arrival. He also made sure to film a panoramic view of the surroundings, his pool, the fence, the location where Rhonda first approached, just to establish a clear visual record. If this turned into a case of his word against Rhonda's, the more evidence he had, the better. Soon, Fowler motioned for Elijah to join them, so he walked over, phone at his side but still recording. "Mr. Johnson," Fowler said, "Ms. Maxwell insists you threatened her. I've seen part of your video, but is there anything else you want to add?" Elijah inhaled steadily. "Officer, as I've explained, I never threatened her. All I did was deny her request to use my private pool. She became hostile and escalated the situation. I started filming when I realized her accusations might become serious." Fowler shifted uncomfortably. It was clear he didn't relish being in the middle of such a contentious dispute. "Ms. Maxwell," he said, turning to Rhonda, "the recorded footage doesn't show any harassment or aggression on Mr. Johnson's part. Could you explain where these threats occurred?" Rhonda placed a hand on her chest dramatically. "He must have done it before he started filming. He glared at me, told me to get off his property or else. It's my word against some video that probably began at a convenient moment for him." Elijah tried not to let frustration get the best of him. "I turned the camera on as soon as she began raising her voice," he clarified. "She never once indicated she felt threatened until after I refused pool access. That's when she decided to call 911. Officer Fowler frowned, glancing between them. "Look," he said, "this is a civil issue at best, private property rights. There's no sign of assault or trespassing, given you're still outside the fence, Ms. Maxwell. But you did claim he was threatening you, which appears unsubstantiated from the video. If you want to press charges, you need actual evidence." Rhonda huffed, color flooding her cheeks. "So that's it? He can just get away with scaring a mother and child? And you won't do a thing?" Fowler sighed, folding his arms. "There's no indication he's done anything illegal. If you're worried about your safety, you can file a report, but the lack of evidence won't get you far. Plus, the video suggests a different story than the one you've told." An uneasy silence settled over the yard. Rhonda looked furious, as though she hadn't anticipated the possibility of her tactic failing. Elijah felt a flicker of relief. At least Fowler seemed unwilling to simply take her story at face value without proof. Nonetheless, Rhonda refused to retreat. What about the fact that he's denying my son a chance to swim? We live in this neighborhood too. Shouldn't he be required to share? Fowler cleared his throat. Ma'am, it's his private property. He's under no obligation to let anyone else use it. That's not a policing matter. It's just how property rights work. The logic left Rhonda momentarily speechless, though her eyes still burned with resentment. She opened her mouth, perhaps ready to fling another accusation, but stopped when Milo tugged at her sleeve. The boy whispered something inaudible, glancing at Elijah with a mix of curiosity and caution. Rhonda's posture stiffened, and she pulled Milo closer. Fine, she spat, I see how it is. Just when Elijah thought the ordeal might be over, Rhonda took out her phone again. This time, she swiveled the camera toward Elijah, filming him in return. I'm capturing your face, she announced. If you think this is the end, you're sadly mistaken. People in Pinecrest Heights will know who you really are. Elijah did his best to remain stoic. I'm not hiding anything, he replied. Please, just leave me to enjoy my day. I'd really like to avoid further conflict. Officer Fowler stepped in, voice firm. All right, that's enough. Ms. Maxwell, I need you to step back from Mr. Johnson's property line. If you continue to linger or harass him, it may be considered trespassing. Rhonda scoffed, glaring at both Fowler and Elijah. We'll see about that, she murmured, then turned on her heel and marched down the sidewalk, Milo trailing behind. As she disappeared from view, Elijah finally allowed himself to exhale. The tension in the air receded slightly, though the residue of anxiety and anger lingered. Fowler studied Elijah for a long moment. I'll file a brief report in case this escalates, he said quietly. But for now, there's no grounds to detain anyone. Elijah thanked him, feeling a swirl of emotions, relief that he wasn't carted off on false charges, frustration that the dispute had even reached this stage, and a lingering worry that Rhonda's threats might not end here. With one last nod, Fowler left, leaving Elijah to stand in his yard, phone in hand, uncertain of how this confrontation might reverberate throughout the neighborhood. In the wake of Officer Fowler's departure, Elijah Johnson hoped the situation would defuse. He was wrong. Within half an hour, another squad car pulled up outside his home. This time, it wasn't Fowler but Officer Grant, a seasoned member of the local police force known for his firm approach. Elijah stood on the porch, heart pounding, as the uniformed man walked up the driveway with an air of authority that felt more intimidating than reassuring. Mr. Johnson. Officer Grant called out. Elijah raised his hand in acknowledgement. I'd like to have a word with you regarding a complaint filed by Ms. Maxwell. Suppressing a groan, Elijah nodded and stepped down from the porch. He was grateful for the video evidence he already had on his phone, but the reappearance of law enforcement rattled him. Sure, officer. I'm listening. Grant's gaze swept across the yard, taking in the neatly trimmed grass, the pristine pool, and the fence where Rhonda and Elijah had argued earlier. I understand there was a dispute about allowing Ms. Maxwell's child to use your pool, he began, his voice measured. According to her statement, you behaved aggressively and refused to leave the area to de-escalate the situation. Elijah tensed. Wait, I'm on my own property. Why would I leave my own home? She was the one who came over and demanded access to my pool. Grant's expression remained neutral. I appreciate your perspective, sir, but Ms. Maxwell claims she felt unsafe. She says you threatened her. She's also made allegations about you using your physical presence to intimidate her. A chill swept down Elijah's spine. Rhonda was doubling down on false claims, framing his refusal to share as something sinister. He inhaled slowly, recalling the advice many had given him about staying calm in police encounters. Officer, I have a recording of the encounter, he said, retrieving his phone. It shows I never left my property line. She's the one who refused to back down. Grant's eyebrows arched, but he didn't immediately ask to see the footage. So you say, he remarked. But Ms. Maxwell is quite insistent. She even mentioned that your refusal was racially motivated, implying she and her son were singled out. Elijah's jaw clenched. This was more serious than he'd thought. Rhonda wasn't simply claiming harassment, she was invoking race to bolster her accusations. "Officer, that's absolutely false," Elijah replied, controlling the quiver in his voice. "I would have refused anyone who showed up demanding to use my pool, regardless of their background. It's private property, plain and simple." Grant let out a long breath. "I'm not here to pass judgment yet. However, the department takes any allegations of discrimination seriously. We also want to maintain community peace. I need to ensure both parties remain civil." There was something about his tone, an edge of skepticism, that put Elijah on edge. It felt like the officer had already been swayed by Rhonda's emotional pleas. Concerned, Elijah unlocked his phone and opened the video file. "Officer Grant," he said as calmly as possible, "I really think you should see this." Grant shifted, crossing his arms. "Ms. Maxwell stated you likely edited the recording. If there's missing context, it might not tell the full story." Elijah bristled. "I can show you the entire uncut clip. You can check the timestamp. There's no splicing or editing. It clearly shows that I never threatened her." Still, Grant hesitated, scanning the yard again. Sometimes, even an unedited video doesn't capture the entire sequence of events. "Did you say anything before filming? Make any gestures that could be perceived as menacing?" It was evident that Elijah was under suspicion, again. "Officer," he tried once more, struggling to maintain composure. "I did not. I'm the one who felt threatened. She was on my property, yelling at me and insisting I let her use my pool. When I refused, she escalated, called 911, and started claiming I was harassing her. That's all there is to it." Grant pursed his lips. "All right. For the sake of argument, let's assume you did nothing wrong. Ms. Maxwell mentioned she wants to press charges if you continue preventing her and her son from accessing the pool." Elijah blinked in disbelief. "Press charges? For what? Denying someone entry to my private residence isn't a crime." The frustration in his tone was unmistakable. Grant took a step closer, lowering his voice. "The argument, from her perspective, is that your refusal, combined with your behavior, amounts to intimidation. She also states that you threatened to call the police on her if she didn't leave. Did you?" Elijah nodded firmly. "I did say I'd call the police, only after she refused to go and started shouting at me. That was me defending my home, not threatening her." He found himself growing livid at the sheer audacity of the accusations. Yet he knew anger would only deepen the officer's suspicion. Stepping back, Officer Grant frowned. "We've had similar disputes in Pinecrest Heights before. Sometimes, the simplest resolution is to compromise and avoid further escalation. Maybe let her son swim for a bit, keep the peace." Elijah felt as though the ground had shifted under him. Was an officer of the law seriously suggesting he yield his privacy to appease a baseless complaint? "I'm sorry, officer, but that's not a solution. This is my home. I don't know her, and I'm not comfortable letting strangers use my pool." Grant's expression hardened, as though Elijah's refusal baffled him. "Look, I'm trying to prevent things from spiraling. Ms. Maxwell is determined. She might escalate this further, and I'd hate to see it become a bigger ordeal." Despite the pit in his stomach, Elijah stood his ground. "With all due respect, officer, it's already a bigger ordeal because she made it one. I'm not going to reward that behavior." Silence hung between them for a moment. Then Grant sighed and shook his head. "All right, Mr. Johnson. I'll write up a follow-up report. But I strongly suggest you keep your distance from Ms. Maxwell in the future. If she claims harassment or intimidation again, we'll have to look into it thoroughly." Elijah watched him depart, torn between relief and incredulity. Once again, the law seemed inclined to treat Rhonda's allegations seriously, despite his evidence. With each new police visit, he felt the precariousness of his position grow. How many more times would he have to prove his innocence before the authorities realized he was the one being harassed? Elijah Johnson felt an eerie quiet settle over his backyard as Officer Grant drove away. The pool's water glimmered under the late afternoon sun, a stark reminder of the unexpected chaos swirling around what should have been a simple amenity. He decided to take a break indoors, hoping that distance might discourage any further confrontations. Yet, no more than 20 minutes later, voices drifted in from the front of his house. Stepping cautiously toward his living room window, Elijah glimpsed Rhonda Maxwell once again, this time joined by an older woman, perhaps a neighbor or relative, pointing accusingly at his front door. Their conversation was impossible to make out fully, but fragments reached him. "He's dangerous, and, you can't trust a word he says." Blood pounding in his ears, Elijah realized she was rallying others against him, weaving a tale that painted him as some sort of menace. Before he could decide whether to confront them, the sound of another car engine approached. To his amazement, it was yet another patrol vehicle. A sense of dread gnawed at him. How many times would the police be called before they saw the pattern? This time, an officer he didn't recognize stepped out. Elijah inhaled deeply, steadying himself, and went to meet the newcomer on his porch. The officer introduced herself as Sergeant Hayes, a level-headed woman who exuded a more measured aura than her predecessors. "Good afternoon, Mr. Johnson," she said calmly. "We received a call about an ongoing neighborhood dispute involving trespassing and harassment. I understand you've already spoken to some of my colleagues." Elijah nodded, exasperation creeping into his tone. "Yes, Sergeant. Ms. Maxwell keeps calling the police on me because I won't let her or her son use my private pool. It's been made clear I haven't done anything illegal, yet the calls continue." Hayes regarded him with a thoughtful gaze, as though weighing his words. "I see. Mind if I talk to both of you together to clarify the situation?" Though reluctant, Elijah agreed, figuring it might put an end to the constant complaints. He led Hayes around the side of the house, where Rhonda waited with her companion, arms folded defiantly. The older woman stood by her, wearing a stern expression that suggested she shared Rhonda's convictions or had been fed the same skewed story. "I want him gone," Rhonda declared the moment Hayes approached. "He refuses to be reasonable, and he's causing a scene in our neighborhood." Elijah nearly laughed at the irony. "This is my home," he reminded her. "I can't leave my own property. You're the ones coming here." Rhonda's companion chimed in, voice quavering with feigned concern. "He's stirring up trouble, Sergeant. He's using intimidation tactics to keep a mother from a resource that should be available to the community." Hayes raised a hand for quiet. "All right, let's keep this civil. Mr. Johnson, is there a reason you refuse to allow Ms. Maxwell's son to use the pool, even for a limited time? Perhaps that might resolve the conflict." Elijah felt a surge of frustration. Was he truly expected to hand over his private property to appease unsubstantiated demands? "Sergeant," he replied, doing his best to remain calm, "this is my home, bought with my savings. I've explained multiple times, she and I are strangers, and I'm not comfortable letting them in. Liability alone is a concern, not to mention my right to privacy." Rhonda rolled her eyes, stepping forward. "He's just being difficult," she said, voice dripping with indignation. "Plenty of neighbors in Pinecrest Heights share amenities. It's not a big deal unless you make it one." Sergeant Hayes shifted, glancing from Rhonda to Elijah. "I understand both sides," she murmured, though her tone suggested she felt the tension. "The issue is that Ms. Maxwell claims you're provoking her by refusing any compromise. She alleges you stand outside, glaring at her family, and that she feels unsafe." Elijah's mind reeled. "That's not true. I only stand outside because I live here. I'm not glaring, just existing on my own property." Rhonda's companion gave a dramatic sigh. "Officer, this has gotten out of hand. Every time we pass by, he looks at us like we're intruding, which clearly we're not if the fence is visible from the sidewalk. Hayes pressed her lips together, as though unwilling to take sides without more proof. Mr. Johnson, she finally said, maybe you could step inside for a bit, let them pass without confrontation. That might help reduce tensions. The request stunned Elijah. He understood the officer's desire to maintain peace, but it implied that, once again, he should remove himself from his own space to suit the fabrications of someone else. Am I being ordered to leave? He asked quietly, an edge of defiance creeping into his voice. Hayes shook her head. Not exactly. But I recommend it to prevent more conflicts. We want to avoid an escalation that could lead to a more serious complaint. Rhonda seized the opportunity. Yes, please, if you could just step inside while we walk by. That way my son doesn't feel scared by you looming over the fence. The older woman nodded fervently, as if they'd concocted the perfect solution. Elijah, cornered by the suggestion that refusing might mark him as uncooperative, found himself in a surreal predicament, forced to concede the use of his own yard. After a moment's hesitation, he recognized that resisting now might only heighten the tension. So, swallowing his pride, he gritted his teeth and murmured, "Fine." A satisfied smirk crossed Rhonda's face. She gave Sergeant Hayes a nod, then motioned for Milo and her companion to follow her along the sidewalk. As they passed, Elijah retreated inside, shutting the door behind him with a heavy heart. He felt humiliated, outraged, and powerless all at once, forced to yield ground rather than have another run-in with law enforcement. Inside, he watched through the window as Rhonda took her time strolling past his property, casting glances toward the pool. He suspected that if the officers hadn't been present, she might have tried to slip in. The invisible line dividing his rights from her demands had been obliterated by repeated police calls. Now, even in his own home, he couldn't freely enjoy the life he'd worked so hard to build without fear of an altercation. The moment the group left, Sergeant Hayes returned to her patrol car, offering a polite wave before driving off. No arrests, no definitive resolution, just another recommendation that Elijah accommodate the very people encroaching on his space. He sank onto the couch, trying to process how one neighbor's brazen entitlement had led to him feeling exiled from his own backyard. In the silence of his living room, he vowed to find a way to reclaim his peace and stand up for his rights, no matter how many times Rhonda called the authorities. The next day, Elijah Johnson woke with renewed resolve. Being told to step inside his own house felt like the final straw, and he was determined to fight back in a constructive, lawful manner. First, he compiled the videos and photos he'd recorded of Rhonda Maxwell's confrontations. He created a digital folder labeled Property Dispute Evidence, meticulously organizing timestamps and notes about each incident, including the repeated visits from different police officers. He then decided to speak with neighbors he felt might be sympathetic or at least impartial. Strolling down the street of Pinecrest Heights, Elijah approached a few homes whose occupants he recognized from casual waves and polite nods over the past few weeks. To his relief, most were friendly, if a bit cautious about getting involved. Some expressed shock when he described Rhonda's demands. At one house, a retiree named Patricia Evans opened the door. She greeted Elijah politely, and after hearing his story, shook her head in disbelief. "I've lived here for over 20 years, Patricia remarked. Neighbors usually mind their own business unless it's something urgent. Rhonda Maxwell is new to this area, but I've already heard she's been stirring up drama." Emboldened, Elijah asked if Patricia had ever seen Rhonda or her son near his property. The older woman nodded. "I saw her once, pointing at your pool and ranting about how you were keeping it all to yourself. I didn't think much of it at the time, figured it was just idle complaining. Didn't realize it went this far." Elijah recorded a brief statement with Patricia's permission, her voice describing the day she witnessed Rhonda's ire. He felt a small but significant victory in collecting a neighbor's testimony. Thanking Patricia, he moved on to another house, where a young couple, Derek and Amanda Lee, listened sympathetically. They too had glimpsed Rhonda outside Elijah's fence and considered it odd that she spent so much time fixated on his pool. Not everyone was as supportive. A few neighbors refused to speak at all, possibly worried about retribution or simply not wanting to be dragged into a public dispute. One even mentioned that Rhonda had come around warning everyone about Elijah's aggressive nature, claiming he spied on neighbors from his yard. Elijah could only sigh at the blatant misinformation. Still, each rejection fueled his determination. He realized the importance of countering Rhonda's narrative with facts, especially in a suburban environment where rumor could overshadow truth. By mid-afternoon, Elijah had gathered enough statements to feel encouraged, but he also recognized he needed professional guidance. The repeated police visits and suggestions that he yield his own property rights felt deeply unjust. Taking a leap of faith, he contacted a local civil rights organization, Pinecrest Legal Aid, explaining the circumstances. Within the hour, he received a call back from a paralegal named Sandra Noble, who listened attentively as Elijah recounted the entire ordeal. "This sounds like a case of discriminatory harassment and misuse of emergency services," Sandra observed. "We've had situations where individuals weaponize 911 calls under false pretenses, especially focusing on race or personal disputes. We can definitely assist you in filing a complaint and possibly seeking legal remedies." Elijah felt a surge of relief. For the first time, someone official seemed ready to stand by him rather than telling him to accommodate Rhonda's demands. Sandra recommended he gather all available evidence, video, witness statements, police reports, and set up a meeting with one of their attorneys. She also suggested Elijah consider speaking out publicly if he felt comfortable doing so, as many communities responded better to these injustices when they gained visibility. After hanging up, Elijah scrolled through his phone's videos and pictures once more, steeling himself for the next steps. He found an email from an attorney at Pinecrest Legal Aid, requesting a summary of events with an attached timeline. Eagerly, he began typing up a detailed account, starting from the first day Rhonda showed up at his fence, right down to the moment Sergeant Hayes told him to stay inside his own house. Each paragraph served as both a catharsis for Elijah's frustration and a building block for his eventual legal stance. Although a storm of uncertainty still loomed overhead, Elijah sensed a glimmer of hope. No longer would he battle Rhonda's campaign of misinformation alone. With the support of Pinecrest Legal Aid, and a few neighbors willing to speak up, he had a chance to reclaim his peace and hold Rhonda accountable for her actions. The repeated police involvement was more than a mere annoyance, it bordered on harassment, and now he had a path to address it systematically. As evening settled in, Elijah sat at his dining room table, gazing out the window at his tranquil pool. In that stillness, he allowed himself a moment of reflection. He recalled the excitement he'd felt upon purchasing this home, imagining backyard barbecues and solitary swims under a warm sun. The conflict had stained those visions, replacing them with anxiety each time he heard footsteps near his fence. Yet, bolstered by legal counsel and community support, he felt a renewed sense of determination. Tomorrow, he would finalize the documents, gather the last pieces of visual evidence, and submit them to Pinecrest Legal Aid. Perhaps the process would be lengthy and exhausting, but he knew staying silent would mean letting Rhonda's narrative flourish. If he won this fight, he'd not only protect his own rights but also set a precedent for neighbors who might endure similar bullying in the future. For once, Elijah felt the tides might finally be turning in his favor, and he vowed to see this struggle through to the end. A few days after contacting Pinecrest Legal Aid, Elijah Johnson was heartened to witness a wave of unexpected solidarity from certain members of the Pinecrest Heights neighborhood. Word had spread about Rhonda Maxwell's repeated police calls and her attempt to paint Elijah as a threat. While some residents continued to steer clear of the drama, others recognized the injustice unfolding on their doorstep. Elijah was out walking his dog one morning when a middle-aged neighbor named Carla Morrison flagged him down. She apologized for not stepping in sooner, explaining she had 2 teenage sons of her own and understood how quickly a friendly gesture could be twisted. However, after learning more about Elijah's situation, she decided she couldn't remain silent. Carla offered to speak on Elijah's behalf if legal proceedings escalated, recounting the day she saw Rhonda pacing around his fence while gesturing angrily at the pool. Over the next few hours, Elijah's doorbell rang more than usual. A handful of neighbors stopped by to voice their support, some bearing homemade cookies or small gifts as tokens of goodwill. Each person recalled different snippets of Rhonda's confrontational attitude, how she disparaged Elijah's right to own a pool, questioned his background, or boasted about calling the police whenever she pleased. For Elijah, these small acts of kindness validated his decision to seek help. No longer was it just his word against Rhonda's. With every additional witness coming forward, the disparity in their stories became clearer. Though not everyone had direct evidence, the sheer volume of personal accounts painted Rhonda as the instigator, the one who took a mundane neighborhood dynamic and turned it into a full-blown harassment campaign. Meanwhile, Milo, the boy at the center of the pool conflict, was rarely seen outdoors. Rumors circulated that he was embarrassed by his mother's behavior and felt uncomfortable walking near Elijah's house. Elijah couldn't help but feel sympathy for the child, imagining how difficult it must be to watch his mother wage a personal vendetta against a neighbor. By the end of the day, Elijah had gathered a dozen or so statements from those willing to speak up. He carefully compiled them with his video footage and typed transcripts of every significant interaction. That night, he emailed everything to Sandra Noble at Pinecrest Legal Aid, determined to keep the momentum going. Though legal battles rarely concluded quickly, Elijah sensed that with each new show of support, the scales were tipping in his favor. As he finally settled down to rest, Elijah allowed himself a hopeful smile. Despite the stress and fear Rhonda's actions had inflicted, the unity emerging among his neighbors reminded him that not everyone was ready to buy into her narrative of division. Perhaps, in time, this adversity would forge a stronger sense of community, and restore the peace he had worked so hard to find in his new home. Within weeks, the situation in Pinecrest Heights escalated from a local dispute to a widely discussed topic throughout the county. With Pinecrest Legal Aid backing him, Elijah Johnson filed a formal complaint alleging harassment and the misuse of emergency services against Rhonda Maxwell. He also requested a review of the police responses, pointing to the possibility of bias after being repeatedly told to leave his own property. Media outlets caught wind of the story, intrigued by the idea of a homeowner facing baseless accusations simply for protecting his private pool. Journalists interviewed several neighbors, many of whom corroborated Elijah's accounts of Rhonda's unreasonable demands and confrontational tactics. In turn, the local police department launched an internal investigation, determining that at least one of the officers who responded had failed to follow proper procedure, leading to a recommendation of disciplinary action. The legal proceedings moved swiftly once enough evidence had been compiled. Rhonda was charged with filing a false report and faced civil litigation for defamation. Meanwhile, the officer most sympathetic to her baseless claims, Officer Grant, was terminated after an internal affairs review cited gross mishandling of the situation. The resolution served as a powerful message to those who used racial or social biases to manipulate authorities. For Elijah, the victory was bittersweet. While he felt vindicated, he couldn't erase the anxiety and humiliation he endured. Nevertheless, the aftermath revealed an unexpected silver lining. The neighbors who had once kept their distance rallied around him, offering help with yard work, delivering home-cooked meals, and openly denouncing Rhonda's behavior. His pool, once a source of contention, became a neighborhood symbol of unity and resilience. As summer drew to a close, Elijah hosted a small gathering in his backyard, inviting the supportive neighbors who stood by him. A gentle breeze rustled the trees as they enjoyed snacks and drinks near the very pool that had ignited the controversy. Soft laughter and friendly conversation replaced the tension of previous weeks. With each warm smile and handshake, Elijah felt a renewed sense of belonging. Watching the sun set over the shimmering water, Elijah reflected on how a single misstep, someone demanding access to what wasn't theirs, had sparked a profound lesson on community, justice, and personal rights. He was grateful to have come out on the other side with his dignity intact and his new neighbors by his side. In the glow of the setting sun, Pinecrest Heights no longer felt like a battleground, it felt like home. Hey everyone! If you found this story powerful and meaningful, Please show your support by hitting the like button, subscribing to the channel, ringing the bell to never miss our thought-provoking content. Your support helps us continue sharing stories that inspire, educate, and challenge perspectives. Thank you for being part of this journey.